We're a fairly new not-for-profit social enterprise. We started last year. Our goal is really to embed ethics into the way we live and work in Reading and improve ethical decision-making. We want to inspire people that they have choice when they make decisions and hopefully make more ethical decisions. And we do believe you can do that through better awareness and education. So education is a key focus of ours. And we do believe that working together we can achieve a lot more. So we're all about working with organizations in this area to collaborate, to develop that kind of ecosystem where this area is seen as a better, more ethical place to do business. We have a growing list of partners and supporters, which is fantastic, and over 2,000 individual members and followers over various social media sites. So I think that shows, there is definitely an appetite here for us, and we're very pleased with the way it's going. All of our work is done through volunteers. I'm a volunteer, and everyone works for us as volunteer. And we hope that Reading is the start of something called the Ethical Cities Movement, where other cities can also start what we're trying to do here and develop more ethical environments. So we're trying to sort of develop a template, if you will, which we can pass on to others. We do a whole bunch of things, so do visit our website. The link is on the bottom of most of our slides. So if you click on that or go to that website, you'll see what we do. We do lunchtime webinars such as this one. We do breakfast briefings, focus on business partners. We do public meetups, which are free and in the evening. Actually, there's one coming up next Tuesday evening around Climate Action Network in the Reading area and impact on health. People in the region, so please join us for that. A lot of resources on our website. We've developed a code of ethics, and we've also kicked off some training, particularly around healthy and ethical workplaces, and that has been very well received.
I'm glad that Gurpreet mentioned Melbourne, because I actually hail from Melbourne originally. That's where I grew up. I'm an Australian by birth, and so it's good to see that Melbourne is interested in business ethics and ethics more generally. I'm actually head of Department of Philosophy now. I took over a couple of months ago, and I have to say, as head of the department and as someone who's been, in the background with knowledge of what goes on with Ethical Reading, just to say that I'm delighted on my own behalf and on behalf of the department at this burgeoning partnership between Ethical Reading and the Department of Philosophy at the University of Reading, because I think there's some great ideas out there, and Gurpreet has already shared some of those with you. I think I can see all sorts of great opportunities, and because Reading is in such a prime location with the Thames Valley Park and all the tech companies, I can see all sorts of great stuff going on with ethics and technology and talks, lunchtime talks and breakfast talks by some of the experts in our department. I can see lots of really good things happening. So thank you to Ethical Reading for all the effort that you guys are putting into developing this partnership, and I'm sure it's only going to go from strength to strength. Now, just to fill you in on my project. So I've been working on this project for about 4 to 5 years now, which is the role of conscientious objection and freedom of conscience in medicine. And you probably don't want to hear too much about medicine. You want to hear about some other workplace applications, which I'm going to come on to. But I do need to give you some of the background so you can understand where I'm coming from here. So I got interested in this healthcare issue through my general interest in medical ethics, the ethics of healthcare. And I'm just going to try and... Right, there we go. And I want to draw your attention to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which expressly states that the right to freedom of thought and conscience and religion and et cetera, freedom of belief and et cetera. But particularly this freedom of conscience here is an extremely important right, which is recognized in international treaties and conventions all over the world, to which the UK is signatory, or which has supports, such as the Declaration of Human Rights, the European Convention of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and various others. So the European Convention, the freedom to manifest religion or beliefs, subject to only such limitations prescribed by law and necessary in the public interest in a democratic society, etc., etc. Notice that the way the courts understand these provisions and the way that the treaties are drafted, it's not this is not just about freedom of religion. This is about freedom of beliefs in a very general sense. So the idea is that people's freedom of conscience is protected by international treaty, even if those beliefs or the conscientious beliefs they have are motivated by purely secular reasons. So you might have someone who's, let's say, a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Sikh or another religion whose religion teaches them certain things that require them to have an objection to being involved in certain sorts of activity. That's a commonplace. These cases end up in court on a fairly regular basis and give rise to a lot of controversy, which is how I kind of got into the topic myself. But beliefs can be secular. It could just be that one believes that being involved in certain activities is just morally wrong based on your ethical code, as it were, the code of ethics you live by. I mean, actually, the terminology is quite apposite, given ethical readings are code of ethics and commitment to codes of ethics in the workplace. You know, we have our personal codes of ethics. Each of us has, you know, it's not as though each of us has, you know, very few of us have written books on ethics. You know, it's only people like me who do it for a living who tend to do that sort of thing. But we all think about ethics all the time, especially people who are involved in ethical reading. It's what kind of motivates you. And everyone has their own kind of ethical code. They have certain principles that they live by, respect, whether it be respect for others, you know, the virtues of kindness and generosity, and not harming innocent people and not hurting people without a just cause, and not cheating, being honest, etc., etc. But we all have ethical codes. We don't always agree. In fact, there's a lot of serious disagreement in society about different ethical issues. But on a lot of things, we do agree. Freedom of conscience is about not being coerced by government or by law into getting involved or participating in activities to which you have a deep ethical objection. And I'll say more about kind of examples of that. So, you know, again, Human Rights Act and enshrines this, and, you know, what does it mean in practice? Well, as I say, I got into the topic through medicine, but what initially prompted my thinking was about conscientious objection in wartime. Now, it's very common, pretty common knowledge that particularly in World War I and in other wars, there were people who objected on religious or ethical grounds to being involved in war, in the sense, you know, picking up a gun and killing other people because they were pacifists. Often they were Quakers or belonged to other pacifist organizations, and they objected. And, you know, it wasn't exactly something that went down with a great amount of popularity in the country at large. But, you know, to this country's credit and other countries, provision has been made for conscientious objectors in the military. And in World War I, it was very common for conscientious objectors to be given alternative duties, such as working in agriculture or working in medicine, helping, you know, medically rehabilitate soldiers rather than actually being involved in picking up a gun or weapons and killing themselves. So this is a long recognized tradition in wartime, and in modern legislation with the hot button kind of abortion debate, particularly as it was in the 1960s, the Abortion Act of 1967 gives healthcare workers protection for conscientious objection to being involved in procuring or actually, you know, providing or carrying out abortions. And that's resulted in all sorts of controversies about what exactly is participation and treatment and so on. And I won't bore you with all of that. I've written all sorts of articles on that. I want to concentrate more on broader workplace issues for this presentation. In medical technology, it's become a big issue, so it also applies to things like euthanasia, for example, withdrawal of life support, assisted reproduction techniques that involve IVF and embryo research on human embryos, the storage of human embryos, embryo transfer, and DNA editing of embryos, and all sorts of things. And I don't mean to kind of put anyone off their lunch or anything, but I mean, these are genuine things here that have come up in medicine. You have cases where people are able to obtain from doctors through one means or another, usually having enough money to pay for it, particularly in America, where the system is largely a private system, all sorts of treatments and services to which some medical practitioners are going to have an ethical objection. You know, there are people who want to modify their bodies into the most extreme shapes and appearances, people who have had implantable microchips so they can open doors and, you know, get into their office and travel on transport. There's human cloning, which hasn't, as far as we know, actually happened yet, but is going to happen sooner or later, and the research is going on, editing genes and genomes to eliminate diseases or to for medical enhancement and so on, people who do things to their brains to try and improve memory or take drugs to improve memory, wakefulness, concentration. Performance enhancing drugs in sport are a huge thing that we're all familiar with, endless problems with that in cycling and athletics and weightlifting and all sorts of sports. Now, the thing with all of these technologies, these treatments, these services is that they have to come from somewhere. Most people are not able to do these things to themselves. They have to go to medical practitioners, basically. They have to go to people who have knowledge and ability. And if it's in a legitimate, it's not, breaking the law, it's not kind of in a back street, but it's in a legitimate medical setting, a doctor is going to find themselves and will increase themselves in these positions of conscientious kind of pressure where they have to think, well, am I willing to do this? Am I willing to carry out this treatment or this surgery? How does that sit with my ethical belief? And some doctors may think it's okay to carry out a particular treatment. Other doctors may think it violates their ethical beliefs in religious reasons or purely secular reasons. What I've been involved in is a kind of project to help promote conscience in medicine, so that ultimately what I would like to see is some sort of statutory protection for healthcare workers, that they not in any way face disciplinary action or demotion, or not being hired or being in some way punished for refusing on genuine conscience grounds to carry out certain things that go past their red lines. And there are cases where people have been disciplined, and I think it's a really serious issue, and it's only going to get worse because of medical technology. And, the arguments that I put forward are that, for example, we don't need to dwell on this, and you can have a look at the slides later, but if a society accepts conscientious objection in wartime, they should accept it in the case of medicine. And if freedom of conscience is a fundamental civil right, at least in a democratic and liberal society, as envisaged by, say, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, then it should be permissible in medicine. And I'll just skip that slide because that says a little bit more about the military case if you do want to ask me more about that. I mean, there are issues to do with, being ostracized, being punished, being made to feel like a lesser person because you have a conscientious objection. There are stigmas that you can't really get rid of, but legally speaking, there needs to be some kind of protection. Now, this got me thinking about the professions in general. And this is where I think you're going to be perhaps particularly interested. Why medicine? Is medicine special? And I've just published an article on this in a journal which is called The New Bioethics, and the article which is online is called How Special is Medical Conscience? And I'm thinking about, medicine is special in many ways because we're involved, doctors are involved in very intimate, delicate conversations with patients about sensitive matters to do with healthcare. And doctors perhaps are in a slightly peculiar position here and are subject to certain pressures that your average professional in some other profession won't be. But as other ethicists have pointed out, and as I've been increasingly thinking, it's not a kind of matter of principle that it's going to be unique to medicine that there should be a conscience issue. Everyone has their ethical red lines, and in the professions, one ought to have one's ethical red lines about how one behaves in a given profession, with your hat on as a member of a certain profession. As an accountant, as a lawyer, as a businessman, as a member of a board of directors of some organization. Would you not, as a professional, no matter what profession you were in, have certain red lines and boundaries that you wouldn't go past, even though those boundaries might not be shared by other people, but that they might or might not be. They might be widely shared, but they might not be. They might be a certain boundary that you personally think that on your deepest ethical convictions, you just don't want to cross. So an example that has come up is, or that was mentioned in a recent book on conscience in healthcare, was advertising. So imagine an advertising executive in the 1960s who was asked to, or let's say maybe even the 1970s. So, as far as what we've been told, the tobacco companies knew about the dangers of smoking from, very early on, let's say the 1960s. So suppose you're an advertising executive in the 1970s or the 1980s, when this knowledge was available and widespread, but nevertheless smoking was still regularly advertised on television, in cinemas, on public transport, etc., etc. And your boss, your line manager, comes to you and wants you to get involved in a very lucrative contract to develop an advertising campaign to promote smoking. And you know about the evidence. You're aware how dangerous this thing is. It's not illegal to smoke. It's not banned. It's not illegal to advertise it. But nevertheless, you have an ethical problem with it. It kind of crosses a red line for you because you feel that you're cooperating in the promotion of seriously dangerous activity. What should you do? So you say to the boss, I'm not going to be involved in this. I can't do it. I'll advertise, Coca-Cola or whatever, but I don't want to advertise smoking. It kills people. And so you find that all of a sudden, you're not being promoted, you're not getting pay rises, you're being shunned by your colleagues, your boss is calling you in for regular chit-chats about your attitude. And you might find that in a very kind of slow and steady way, you kind of get pushed sideways, and you might find that you have to leave that job, and you might find that you're actually blacklisted. I don't know whether this has ever happened, but it's certainly not inconceivable that you might be blacklisted within the advertising industry. You're not a team player. Should you be disciplined? Should you be subject to that kind of treatment? Now, in my view, if you have a prevalent attitude within an organization that a certain kind of activity is okay, then you should expect, if you've got a bit of a spine, that if you have an ethical objection that goes against the grain of the culture or practices within that organization, you're going to get some flack for that. I think you have to expect. This just kind of comes with the territory. You don't expect people to pat you on the head and say, there, so sorry to hear you don't want to be involved in this advertising campaign. It's only worth £100 million to us, but don't worry. Let's find you something else to do. No, you're going to get a bit of stick. You're going to have people looking sideways at you, and it's going to be hot. And you might find yourself forced out. And you might want to leave of your own accord. But what I believe is that there should be procedures in place to stop you from being punished in the sense of just dismissed, demoted, not hired, blacklisted, having your pay lowered, things like that. That should not be allowed any more than various other kinds of discrimination that are already illegal. And think about the law. An example I came up with was a case of, let's suppose you're a lawyer. And you're a lawyer in very good standing and well regarded within your firm. But along comes, your senior partner and says to you, well, look, we've got this tax minimization scheme that our client wants to put in place. It's going to save the client millions of pounds. It's going to earn millions of pounds for the firm. It's very lucrative. And you look at this minimization scheme and you think, well, is it breaking law? It's not strict tax evasion. It's not breaking the law, because in a case like that, you're going to be protected from getting involved in something that breaks the law. But suppose it doesn't break the law, but it's kind of against the spirit of the law. And it's obvious that it is against the spirit of the law. So it doesn't break the letter, but it breaks the spirit. And you think to yourself, well, is that crossing my red line? I'm really helping this client do something that government or parliament never really intended should be something that should be allowed. It might be a loophole in the law, but it just seems unethical to me, professionally speaking. That's, I'm here to help clients minimize their tax, but in a way that at least is consistent with the intention of the legislature. Should you be removed as a partner, dismissed, blackballed by the legal profession, regarded as being, not quite with it, not quite there, not quite doing everything you can for the benefit of your client? Again, I think legal protection ought to be allowed. So this is different from whistleblower legislation. So already there exists in the UK whistleblower legislation, so that there are certain legal protections against, say, for example, unfair dismissal if you publicly divulge, let's say, to the media information about criminal offences by your organisation. You're already protected by that. I'm not talking about whistleblowers. I'm talking about people who don't necessarily want to blow any whistles, but who don't want to be involved themselves. They don't want to be coerced, whether explicitly or subtly, coerced or induced into participating in something that they would rather, to put it in terminology I've used in a book I wrote recently, opt out. They want to be able to opt out. And I've written a book published by the Institute of Economic Affairs called Opting Out. If you Google that later on, it's a free download actually. So, no money in it for me. It's a free download PDF on the Institute of Economic Affairs website. and it's called Opting Out, Conscience and Cooperation in a Pluralistic Society, where I discuss medicine, but I also discuss wider issues. So I think there should be a legal opt-out for the lawyer. So really that's the kind of thing that I'm interested in, and I won't go through, you can have a look at some of these other slides, but there's, a lot of stuff that I can talk about. That's the kind of, the advertising example. But I do think that there should be some legal protection in place, but I'd be very interested to know what you guys think as to whether you think that I'm overreacting here, that there's not such a problem, or whether people shouldn't have any legal protection, or maybe we should look at this in a very different way. So I'm happy to end here, Gurpreet, if you think that would be a good place to end.
Great. I'm also quite interested in, if people have thoughts here and views and questions. If you want to unmute your mic and ask David a question, feel free to do that. We've got a few minutes. I might kick off, actually, David.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking. I mean, I to be honest, I hadn't thought of it. And so this conscientious objection outside the sort of medical sphere and the military sphere before. And so this is very, very interesting to me, and I can absolutely relate to examples of the likes of tax evasion and the smoking example you gave. One of the questions I have is where do you draw the line in some of these? For example, with the advertising scenario, suppose, and you mentioned that perhaps that particular person who's being asked around doing a smoking ad, he would rather do a Coca-Cola ad than smoking. But there may be somebody who actually feels quite strongly about sugary foods, and actually wouldn't want to do a Coca-Cola ad and wouldn't want to do a smoking ad, because both of them cause death. Just one takes a lot longer than the other. So it's as an employer, is there a kind of a sort of practicality issue here? And
absolutely, yeah. Sorry, did you want to say more? Did you want to say more?
Yeah, no. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Absolutely right. I mean, that is one of the key questions, and it's the one that gets raised again and again. Is where do you draw the line? And I can totally understand that. So I have a view about this. I don't think that you're going to get a magic line down the middle which separates all the good cases and all the justified cases from all the unjustified cases. I think where that's a bit of a unicorn. You're not going to find that. So we need practical ways of sorting out the worst kind of cases, the cases that seem to be the most controversial or, difficult to resolve. And I think what you need to do is there needs to be statutory guidance for a start. So the statutory guidance, needs to be fairly general, but it needs to pinpoint certain kinds of beliefs or certain kinds of areas of activity where you should expect a kind of prima facie protection. Then in terms of the detail, Coca-Cola versus smoking, I want to strongly emphasize the role of courts here. Now, maybe some people think I'm being overly optimistic, but I do think courts have a history of being able to, at least in our common law jurisdiction, being able to deal with kind of nuances and differences between different kinds of case in a way that is generally pretty reasonable, where they might say that, well, if it's Coca-Cola you're objecting to, that's kind of a little bit trivial because, it's not the same kind of public health threat in the same way as, let's say, smoking. And then you might, what about alcohol and all this sort of thing? I think the statutory guidance needs to be along the lines of that if a person has a kind of set of principles that they live by, for example, don't engage in activities which directly, and predictably going to seriously undermine your health or anyone's health, then they should be able to find protection in a way that someone who just thinks, let's say, we all need to be healthy. We all need to be healthy. We like Coke, but, sugary food's not good. You say, well, sugary food kills, only it takes longer. Well, I think you need to investigate. There's a lot of debate about the role of sugar in diet, and ultimately there's going to be an issue of kind of the details here, and I think we shouldn't be afraid to look into that, and courts shouldn't be afraid to take evidence on that. But I think a person who just sort of has an objection to being involved in anything that undermines public health, I think that kind of objection looks to me, it's not a bad objection. It's less precise and identifiable and substantial than someone who says, look, I believe do not do things which kill or which directly undermine health in a serious and imminent way. And there's always going to be people on one side or the other who are not satisfied. But I would think that with good statutory guidance and some wise kind of analysis by judges, that we'd build up a body of case law which would, over time, would give you an idea of the sorts of cases that would be genuine and protectable and the kinds of cases that would be maybe admirable, but not the sort of thing that really needs legal protection, that a person is feeling that they've been directly coerced into violating their deepest beliefs. That some cases are not quite like that. So that's not a 100% satisfactory answer, but I would be the good judges and the legislature on this.
Great. No, that makes an awful lot of sense to me. So with that, we've actually come up pretty much to the end of time. So thank you very much, David. That was very, very interesting. And I hope actually for our audience as well raised a number of questions, a number of thoughts, which is the purpose of these sessions.